Hello, and welcome to the Psych 101 series on anxiety disorders from iMolecular. Today, we're going to talk about generalized anxiety disorder. To begin with, I'd like to talk about anxiety, talk a little bit about the mind body connection, look at the features of anxiety in the DSM classification. We'll talk a little bit about hormones and neurotransmitters, and then we'll talk about some other causes of anxiety. Now, in future videos, I'll talk about other causes of anxiety as well as other types of anxiety disorders. And I'll also talk about anxiety management. But today we're going to focus on generalized anxiety disorder. Anxiety is a normal human emotion that we all experience. But we will experience this anxiety ranging from very mild to severe. So when we experience anxiety, we are experiencing a set of emotions, physical feelings, sensation, and responses in relationship to parts of our environment or things that we perceive around us as being either adverse and disturbing, harmful, threatening. If things in our environment are unwanted, then this can provoke anxiety. When we start to feel out of control in our lives, this can also provoke anxiety. If we have some types of conflict in our own thoughts, ideas, or values, if we're experiencing a struggle inside of ourself, or if our thoughts, ideas, and values are in conflict or not congruent with the people in our lives or the aspects of our environment. We can also experience anxiety in relation to our own self talk. So maybe we internalize things about ourselves. Maybe someone said something about us that was negative and we internalize and ruminate on those thoughts. That can provoke anxiety. Sometimes people might have some type of behavior that they're trying to break, and that behavior causes anxiety, as well as the fact that they cannot break the behavior or conquer the behavior can be anxiety provoking. So, there are many things that cause us to have anxiety on a daily basis. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the nervous system and how the nervous system plays a role in anxiety. Now, every day in our lives, the nervous system is activated. We get up in the morning, we start to go about our day. We see things, we hear things, we smell things, we taste, we touch. And our brain brings in all of that information through the nervous system. And all of the sensory information then starts to get integrated. And so our perception then is how we're organizing and making sense of and interpreting this sensory information based on the things that are going on around us and inside of us. And as a result of that, we start to develop these thoughts and ideas and beliefs. And these thoughts, ideas, and beliefs that we have then will translate into different types of responses and behaviors. So you can see I created this flow chart that talks about how our perceptions will become our thoughts, and then our thoughts will become our behavior. So, a very large part of the anxiety that we actually experience has to do with what's going on around us and how we're perceiving that, as well as what's going on inside of us and how we're perceiving either our internal state of mind or the physical things that are going on inside of our body. And that can lead to behaviors. Now, one of the main points that I really want to get across is that what starts to go on in the mind as a result of these perceptions is going to manifest in our body as sets of symptoms. And that happens because the nervous system keeps us alive. It keeps our heart beating, it keeps our lungs breathing, it keeps all of the parts of our body moving. And there are different parts of the nervous system. And the nervous system releases neurotransmitters and also hormones all into our bloodstream. One of the branches of the nervous system is called the autonomic nervous system. And a branch of the autonomic nervous system, one of the branches is called the sympathetic nervous system. And some of you might have heard of this. The sympathetic nervous system is also referred to our fight or flight system. And so when something scares us or if we need to fight, then the sympathetic nervous system gets activated. And once the sympathetic nervous system is activated, then it is going to cause the organs in our body, the glands that are inside of those organs, to start releasing hormones. And it is also going to trigger the release of neurotransmitters from the nerves inside of our body. So, one example, if you've ever had anxiety or been afraid, um, something's happened, all of a sudden your heart might start beating very quickly. And that is because your sympathetic nervous system is releasing all of these hormones into the bloodstream, and it's also releasing neurotransmitters to the muscles in the heart that are going to cause the heart to contract more rapidly and create that racing heart that you're feeling, or that racing heartbeat that you're feeling. Also, when the sympathetic nervous system is activated, people will start to sweat. So, if you have anxiety and you start to sweat, it is because your sympathetic nervous system has been activated. Now, in my very first introductory video, I talked a little bit about anxiety and what anxiety is in general, that it is a feeling of worry or fear that becomes disproportionate or overwhelming. And it starts to become a mental health issue when a person's day to day functioning is impacted. Now, generalized anxiety disorder is a type of anxiety disorder where a person experiences anxiety in more than one area of their life. And this is why we refer to it as being generalized. So it's not just one specific area like test taking or being in social situations, it is generalized to many areas of life. Now, the DSM is the Diagnostic and Statistic Manual. And within about the past probably 6 years, the DSM 5 has come out. And this is the book that clinicians use to help classify and diagnose mental health disorders. And when we are looking at mental health disorders, there has to be a duration and a frequency that accompanies that particular disorder. For generalized anxiety disorder, a person is going to need to have 3 or more of the symptoms on the list several times a week for at least 6 months, okay? So this just isn't a random, once a month, maybe even just once a week. It is a person is experiencing this excessive worry several times a week for over 6 months. And the symptoms that we find and that we use to classify it are excessive worry and people feeling out of control. Now, we talked about the nervous system amping up when we get anxious. And so, what happens is you start to expend all of this energy, and the body can only expend energy for so long before it starts to get tired. So, we'll see that fatigue and irritability are features of generalized anxiety disorder. Also, some of the neurotransmitters that are being released into the bloodstream can create this irritability. When people are worried and their mind is going a million miles a minute, they have an inability to focus and concentrate on other tasks in life. Having either psychological tension or muscle tension in the body is also a feature, and sleep disturbances. Either a person has a hard time sleeping, falling asleep, staying asleep because their mind won't shut off, or because of the physiological features where there are these hormones that are in the bloodstream that are keeping the person awake and wired, and they're unable to fall asleep. And then also feelings of restlessness. Now, another thing that we also see too is that some people will tend to avoid particular situations and will have avoidance behavior because they are afraid that they are going to experience anxiety if they're in certain situations. Let's talk now about some of the neurotransmitters and hormones. So serotonin and GABA, these are two of the main neurotransmitters involved in anxiety. Now, GABA, which is an acronym for gamma aminobutyric acid, is actually an amino acid, but it has functions of a neurotransmitter. And the best way to think about GABA is that GABA helps to slow things down in the body, and that's a good thing. Okay. So GABA prevents nerve cells from rapidly firing and rapidly being active. And that's good. We want to be able to be relaxed sometimes. But what research studies have found is that if a person has low levels of GABA, or if those levels are absent or deficient, that the GABA can't do its job and slow things down. And as a result of that, then the nerve cells in the body are going to become overly active and overly stimulated because there is nothing there to keep them in balance and slow them down. Now, serotonin is another neurotransmitter. You might have heard of serotonin. Serotonin is also responsible for um, contributing to and potentially even causing depression. Okay, so many of the medications that we have for depression target the serotonin system, and they act to increase the levels of serotonin in the body to help alleviate the depression. Now, serotonin has many roles in the body. It helps to regulate emotions and moods, which is why we find it being responsible for things like depression and anxiety. It also helps to regulate our appetite, and it also has some roles with dilating and constricting the blood vessels in our body. Now, if you've ever heard people talk about the mind and gut connection, it's because of serotonin. Our gut contains a very high number of serotonin receptors. And this is another reason why it's important to eat well, not just for our physical health, but also for our mental health. So, those two neurotransmitters, serotonin and GABA, um, if they are in low amounts or deficient, then you will find that a person might be highly anxious. Now, the other aspect of this is a hormone. So we talked about, again, the nervous system gets activated. And when the sympathetic nervous system gets activated, it um, causes the adrenal gland to release some hormones. And the adrenal gland, these are two little glands that sit on top of each kidney. So you have a right one and a left one. They sit on top of the kidneys. And the adrenal glands actually release epinephrine, which is known as adrenaline, norepinephrine, which is known as noradrenaline, and cortisol. Now, for anxiety, we mostly look at cortisol and epinephrine. I'm sorry, cortisol and norepinephrine. Now, epinephrine is known as adrenaline, as I was saying, and norepinephrine is known as noradrenaline. We see epinephrine released also in the fight or flight response. But in anxiety, our norepinephrine, this is a neurotransmitter that is playing a role and is increasing alertness. Okay. And so we see this in anxiety because it creates this level of alertness and excitation and can lead to these feelings of restlessness inside of the body. Now, cortisol, many of us have heard of cortisol. It is our stress hormone. Cortisol is naturally high in the morning, but it tapers off towards the end of the day. However, if a person is under a lot of anxiety, then the adrenal glands, under the influence of the nervous system, will continue to um, increase cortisol levels and pump them out into the bloodstream. So when that cortisol stays elevated, that can become very problematic because cortisol has negative effects on the body. One of the effects is that it will act on other hormone pathways inside of the body to increase blood pressure. Cortisol also blocks the production of a type of white blood cell called lymphocytes. And when your white blood cells are not working properly, then you cannot fight off infections. So your immune system can decrease in functioning then as a result of having too much cortisol in the bloodstream. Now, other causes of anxiety. Sometimes if a person has another medical condition, either Another mental health condition, it is common that anxiety disorders will coexist with other mental health disorders. If they have another mental health condition or a physical condition, sometimes people that have hyperthyroidism, some of the symptoms of hyperthyroidism actually look like anxiety. Other types of substance disorders, overuse of any types of drugs, illegal drugs, alcohol can also lead to anxiety. And in future episodes, I'll talk about some of those other medical causes as well as what we can do for anxiety management. Thank you so much for watching today.